History remembers Rome for its armies and emperors, but hidden within the marble heart of the Palatine lies a story the chronicles dared not tell. It speaks of a young empress whose hunger for control blurred the line between desire and dominion. 25 men were summoned to her chamber for a contest no historian recorded. Yet every whisper of it changed how Rome viewed power itself. Tonight, we unseal the chamber history tried to erase. Rome breathed in rumor like incense. By the time summer bled into the marble courtyards, everyone from the laundress at the Tiber to the senators draped in purple had heard the same whisper. The Empress Valeria Messiana ruled not only the empire, but the hearts and fears of every man within it. She was 20 years old, beautiful in the way a blade is beautiful, perfect, gleaming, and meant for destruction. From the Palatine hill, her golden balcony overlooked the entire city. There, behind gauze curtains, she received foreign envoys and veteran generals, their voices trembling as they spoke. What made them tremble was not the threat of armies, but the legend of what took place when the torches dimmed. Some claimed she could read a man's weakness at a glance, others that she tested courage in ways no Roman dared to describe. Yet, the whispers shared one refrain, that soon she would host a night beyond imagining, a competition so strange that even the gods might avert their eyes. Valeria's rise had been meteoric. Born to an old patrician line nearly extinguished by palace intrigues, she had learned early that survival in Rome depended on the mastery of perception. Her marriage to Emperor Claudius had been arranged to calm rival factions, but once within the palace, she had outmaneuvered every courtier who underestimated her. Those who opposed her vanished into polite exile or silent graves. Those who served her prospered beyond measure. The historian Cassius later wrote that she ruled through fascination, wielding mystery as others wielded the sword. He never explained what that meant, though in taverns the answer was whispered with both awe and fear. They said Valeria sought to understand the empire through its men, to learn what bound soldier, scholar, and slave alike to obedience. To her, loyalty and submission were experiments. And one night, she intended to conduct the ultimate one. Preparations began quietly. The palace steward ordered rare wines, musicians, and perfumed oils under the guise of a midsummer banquet. The physician was seen measuring strange doses of herbs, while the chief chamberlain dismissed half the servants, keeping only those who could be trusted or silenced. By the full moon, a rumor surfaced that 25 men of differing ranks had been discreetly summoned to the Palatine. None knew why, none dared refuse. Meanwhile, in the city below, the people sensed something monumental stirring. Torchlight glimmered each night on the palace terraces. The empress's litter was seen returning at hours when even thieves slept. The poet Marcellus wrote, "She moves as if dreaming of judgment," a line that would later be censored by imperial decree. By the week's end, every corridor of the palace echoed with a strange expectancy. Valeria appeared calm, almost serene, though her eyes carried the restlessness of a storm waiting for release. When a senator's wife inquired about the upcoming feast, the empress merely smiled and said, "Rome shall learn what devotion means." That evening, the palace gates closed earlier than usual. From the forum, onlookers saw the last torches disappear behind bronze doors. None could have known that within those walls, history was shifting, not through war or decree, but through a single woman's design to test the limits of power, flesh, and fear. Power, in Rome, was a currency traded in silence. And no one spent it with greater precision than Empress Valeria Messiana. To the crowds, she was divinity incarnate, the marble ideal of Roman womanhood. But within the palace, where truth festered behind embroidered curtains, she was known for something far more dangerous: understanding men too well. She had risen not by fortune, but by calculation. Her father, a senator accused of conspiracy, had perished in the dungeons of Nero's reformist purge. Her mother, once a lady of refinement, had vanished into self-imposed exile. The child left behind learned quickly that pity had no place in survival. At 15, Valeria entered the imperial court as a ward to an aging duchess. Within a year, she commanded its gossip like a general commands troops. By 20, she was empress. Those who chronicled her life wrote in half-truths. The historian Suetonius called her a hunger in human form. To him, she was the embodiment of Rome's corruption, a woman whose gaze could bend loyalty and ignite rebellion. Yet beneath the layers of scandal and accusation lay a mind that grasped something few men did, that desire, when controlled, could conquer more than armies. Valeria's power was not rooted in affection. It was rooted in study. She observed men, their ambitions, their boasts, their fears. She saw the fragility in their pride and the strange courage in their shame. To her, every gesture was a code. Every hesitation revealed allegiance or deceit. Over time, she learned that the empire's greatest weakness was not its borders, but its hearts. It was said she kept a ledger of every senator, general, and courtier, not of wealth or crimes, but of their temptations. "Give a man what he craves," she once whispered to her physician, "and you will learn what he fears." That belief became the foundation of her next act, the infamous night history would later call the competition of the 25. But before the night, there was restlessness. Valeria began to withdraw from public appearances. Audiences with the emperor grew brief. Banquets ended early. Rumor claimed she had visions of the goddess Venus, commanding her to measure devotion in flesh rather than oath. Others whispered darker things, that she sought to test humanity itself, to see how far men would crawl for favor when stripped of dignity. Her husband, Emperor Claudius, tolerated her eccentricities at first. She had, after all, brought stability to his fractured court. Yet even he grew uneasy. Her laughter carried a chill. Her prayers sounded like experiments. Still, she was untouchable, adored by the people, protected by the Praetorian Guard, and feared by those who understood her reach. In her private garden, hidden by high walls of cypress and marble, she began her selection process. Servants brought her scrolls of names, noble heirs, soldiers, scholars, even slaves. She studied them as one might study chess pieces, marking each with ink the color of dried blood. She was not choosing lovers, she was choosing subjects. When her physician expressed concern, she replied with unsettling calm, "Rome is ruled by the myth of men's virtue. I will expose whether it exists." From that moment, the competition ceased to be a rumor. It became a plan, whispered through corridors, scribbled in coded messages, feared by those who knew her genius for cruelty, disguised as ceremony. By the time the sun rose over the Palatine, the list of 25 was sealed with her signet ring. And though none yet knew their fate, all of Rome felt the shift, a tightening in the air, the prelude to revelation or ruin. That evening, as the palace lamps burned late, a servant swore he heard the empress speaking softly to herself. "Rome belongs to those who understand its appetites," she murmured. And with that, Valeria Messiana, the woman who owned Rome, prepared to prove it. When the empress's decree reached the palace steward, it was written in a single line of crimson ink, "Select 25 men worthy of the goddess." No explanation, no ceremony, no signature beyond her seal. Yet every soul in the palace knew what it meant. The empress had devised another of her private studies, those secret trials that blurred the line between ritual and madness. The physician, Drusus Varro, and the chamberlain, Livius, were tasked with assembling the group. Both men served her faithfully for years, though neither could claim to understand her intent. Valeria's orders were precise. The men must represent the empire itself, its strength, intellect, vanity, and obedience. "Let Rome stand before me in all its forms," she had said, "so that I may judge what truly rules it." 5 soldiers were chosen first, veterans of the northern campaigns, scarred, disciplined, bound by honor. They represented the might of Rome's legions, the empire's iron spine. Next came 5 noble heirs, sons of senators and consuls, men born to privilege, yet softened by indulgence. They arrived adorned in gold and arrogance, unaware that their breeding would not save them. 5 gladiators followed, prized fighters from the Colosseum, accustomed to pain and spectacle. They were chosen for endurance, for their bodies bore the language of survival written in scars. The 4th group were scholars, mathematicians, philosophers, and poets. Valeria demanded intellect among her subjects. She wanted to measure not only the body but the mind. Lastly came 5 slaves, taken from her own household. Their inclusion shocked even Livius. "Your Majesty," he protested, "they are not equals to the rest." Valeria's gaze turned sharp. "On the contrary," she replied, "they alone understand what it means to obey." By dusk, the 25 men stood gathered in the Palatine baths, the marble chamber shimmering with candlelight. Steam curled around them like a living veil. They were stripped of titles, weapons, and ornaments, equalized by nudity and fear. Before them, incense burned in silver bowls, carrying the scent of myrrh and spiced wine. Drusus addressed them in the Empress's stead. "Tonight," he declared, "you will partake in a ceremony of divine judgment. The Empress herself shall preside, unseen. You will be tested not by combat, but by will. Each act you endure shall prove your devotion to the Empire and its divine ruler." The men exchanged uneasy glances. None dared speak. The soldiers clenched their jaws. The nobles smirked as if at a jest. The slaves bowed their heads. Behind a silk screen, Valeria watched. Her presence was unseen but palpable, the faint rustle of silk, the gleam of eyes in the candlelight. To her, this was not a spectacle of pleasure, but a study of submission. She wished to see whether discipline, intellect, or fear would falter first. As the preparations continued, musicians played softly from an adjoining hall slow, rhythmic notes that echoed like a heartbeat. The men were anointed with oil mixed with honey and crushed lotus petals. Drusus explained it was to honor Venus, though even he spoke the words uneasily. When all was ready, a final order was given. The doors of the baths were to be sealed until sunrise. No servant, no guard, no whisper would leave those walls. Valeria rose from behind the screen, her eyes glinting like obsidian. "These men," she said quietly to her attendants, "are Rome. Tonight, I shall learn whether Rome kneels or endures." Outside, thunder rolled over the Palatine hill, echoing through the marble corridors. The city slept unaware, while inside the palace, 25 hearts beat in unison, the rhythm of men chosen not for their virtue, but for the experiment of a single woman's will. And as the torches dimmed, the Empress's shadow fell long upon the floor, heralding the beginning of a night that would stain Roman history forever. The preparations for the Empress's ceremony began at twilight. By her decree, the entire western wing of the Palatine was sealed. No messenger entered, no servant departed. Every corridor was guarded by men sworn to secrecy under threat of death. Within those marble halls, even the air seemed to hold its breath. Valeria Messiana called it the ritual of silence. She claimed it was to purify the House of Rome before divine revelation. Yet those who served her knew its truer purpose: control. Before power could be exercised, all witnesses had to be erased from sound itself. Her first command struck terror through the palace. Every servant who assisted in her preparations was to have their tongue cut, not as punishment, but as devotion. The physician Drusus Varro protested in trembling voice. "Majesty, the gods require sacrifice, not mutilation." Valeria's reply was calm, chilling. "Speech breeds corruption. I would have none of it tonight." So it was done. The mutilations took place in the courtyard, muffled by the roar of ceremonial drums. By nightfall, those who remained inside could only communicate through gesture. The Empress moved among them like a high priestess, untouched by pity, her golden robe glinting in the lamplight. She spoke in measured tones, her words recorded silently by scribes who would not live past dawn. The chosen 25 were brought into the great chamber, a vast, domed hall lined with frescoes of Venus, Mars, and the triumphs of Rome. In the center stood a long basin filled with wine and honey. Torches burned low, staining the marble with shifting amber. The physician, his hands still shaking, recited the ritual's purpose as Valeria had written it. Those who would serve the goddess must first be cleansed of mortal deceit. Each man was stripped and bathed in the basin, the mixture of sweetness and alcohol clinging to their skin like a second flesh. When the soldiers entered, they did so stiffly, disciplined even in humiliation. The nobles hesitated, pride flickering behind their fear. The gladiators, accustomed to spectacle, accepted it with grim silence. The scholars shivered, whispering prayers to Mercury under their breath. The slaves obeyed without hesitation, their eyes empty. Once anointed, they were draped in fine linen and led to the dais, a raised platform beneath the statue of Venus Genitrix. There, they knelt in 5 rows, awaiting the Empress's command. Valeria ascended the steps barefoot. Her hair was unbound, her face painted in pale ivory, her eyes lined with soot. To her attendants, she appeared less human than divine, an incarnation of Rome's insatiable hunger for reverence. She spoke softly, but her words carried through the silence. Rome's power does not rest in legions or laws. It rests in the will of those who command obedience. Tonight, you will show me that will. From the shadows, Livia struck a bronze gong, a single resonant note that marked the beginning. The doors were bolted. Outside, the last light of evening died against the city's rooftops. Inside, 25 men knelt beneath the Empress's gaze, bound not by rope but by awe. The torches flickered as though afraid to burn. In that breathless chamber, time itself seemed to pause. The ritual of silence was complete. Rome's most powerful woman now ruled a kingdom of voiceless men, and her next command, whispered rather than spoken, would begin the night that history would never dare to name. Dusk bled across the Palatine like spilled wine. The imperial lamps were lit one by one, their glow turning marble to gold. Within the chamber of the Empress, the air was thick with myrrh and crushed rose petals. Music drifted softly through latticed walls, not the triumphal marches of Rome, but slow, deliberate chords meant to stir unease as much as desire. Valeria Messiana entered with measured grace. Her robe, woven from translucent silk, shimmered faintly as she moved, not to provoke, but to command attention. Every step was calculated, every glance a verdict. Around her, the 25 chosen men knelt in 5 perfect rows, their bodies glistening with the oils of the earlier rite. The scent of wine and honey clung to them, mingling with the incense until the chamber itself seemed alive with intoxication. For a moment, silence reigned, the silence of awe, or perhaps of fear. Then, with a gesture, the Empress began her trial. The first command was obedience. A soldier was ordered to stand until exhaustion conquered him. A scholar to recite verses of philosophy while staring into the Empress's eyes. A noble heir to kneel and hold a torch aloft without flinching. None were cruel tasks, yet beneath her calm voice lay a deeper challenge: submission. To obey her gaze was to surrender control. To disobey, it was to risk annihilation. As the tests unfolded, Valeria observed intently. She noted who trembled, who faltered, who sought her approval with trembling lips or lowered eyes. Desire was not her aim. Revelation was. She wanted to see the human mind fracture beneath the weight of reverence. At intervals, she walked among them, her perfume trailing like a second presence. Fingers brushed against skin, not as invitation, but as examination, a queen assessing the quality of her empire. Even these brief touches drew shivers, not from passion but from terror dressed in beauty. When a gladiator dared lift his eyes to hers, she paused. Their gaze locked, predator and prey, yet neither certain which was which. The Empress smiled faintly, then whispered to her attendants, "Strength without restraint is no virtue." The man was ordered to kneel. He obeyed, trembling. Hours passed. Sweat mingled with incense, and the once orderly chamber descended into fevered silence. Musicians faltered, their notes dissolving into the steady rhythm of human breath. It was as if Rome itself were holding vigil. Near midnight, Valeria dismissed the attendants. Only the 25 remained. She spoke then, her tone soft yet absolute. "You are Rome, its pride, its weakness, its hunger. Tonight I measure not your bodies, but your loyalty to power." The words carried through the incense haze, settling over them like ash. No man dared speak. In their eyes flickered confusion, shame, awe, and something darker, devotion. When she turned from them, her expression was unreadable. Whether she felt triumph or pity, none could tell. She raised a goblet of spiced wine, its surface trembling with candlelight, and murmured a final decree: "The first trial is done. At dawn the true contest begins." Then she vanished behind her veils, leaving 25 hearts burning with questions they could never voice. Outside, thunder broke again over Rome. Inside, the night had begun, not a feast of passion, but an empire's descent into the madness of its own desire. Morning came without sunlight. The Roman sky was bruised with storm clouds, their edges pulsing faintly with lightning, as if the gods themselves were watching. Inside the marble hall, torches replaced daylight, their glow gilding every column, every trembling face. The 25 men stood where they had fallen asleep, or perhaps never slept at all. The Empress Valeria entered barefoot, her robes replaced by a mantle of scarlet that flowed behind her like liquid flame. No crown adorned her head, only a narrow band of gold, symbol enough for power she no longer needed to prove. "This," she declared, her voice smooth as oil, "is not a night for pleasure. It is a night for truth." The attendants unrolled silk banners painted with the insignia of each province represented among the men. Gaul, Numidia, Hispania, Thrace. Every man was not merely a suitor, but an emblem of Rome's reach. The contest was a mirror of empire itself. Who among them could withstand the Empress's command without surrendering to weakness? The first trial began with proximity. Valeria descended from her dais and walked between them, her presence a storm of perfume, movement, and whispered breath. She did not touch. She did not need to. Her closeness alone was enough to unravel composure. Each man was instructed to keep his gaze steady, his silence unbroken, no matter what his mind conjured. One by one they faltered. Some turned their heads aside in shame. Others clenched fists to resist trembling. When one young centurion whispered her name, as though it were a prayer, Valeria's eyes glimmered with something unreadable, victory or sorrow. The second trial was endurance. Servants brought forth goblets of bitter wine and bowls of salt water. Each man was commanded to drink, then recite a pledge of devotion to the empire, even as the liquid burned their throats. The Empress stood over them, voice low, reciting verses from Rome's founding myths: the birth of nations, the hunger of gods, the cost of dominion. Her words mixed duty and temptation until neither could be told apart. It was said later that the air itself pulsed that night, heavy with incense and fear. One senator collapsed, overcome by exhaustion. Another, a poet from Alexandria, laughed uncontrollably, swearing he had seen the goddess Venus standing beside the Empress, smiling through smoke. When silence returned, Valeria spoke again. "You believe this is desire. It is not. This is the face of power, the weight you have worshipped all your lives." Her voice trembled only once when she said the word power. The courtiers nearest to her noticed and exchanged uneasy glances. It was then that they realized the contest was not to test the men. It was to test her own control. At the height of the ceremony, thunder shook the palace walls. Candles sputtered out, and in that brief darkness, breath mingled with breath. When the light returned, Valeria stood alone before them, eyes closed, her robe dusted with falling ash from the torches. The 25 men bowed, but none dared meet her gaze. The Empress raised her hands. "The contest is complete," she whispered. "But the judgment has only begun." Outside, the storm finally broke. Rain poured down the marble terraces like melted glass, washing away the scent of incense, but not the memory of what had taken place within. By dawn, every man swore he had seen the Empress transfigured, no longer mortal, no longer merciful, but a living symbol of Rome's hunger, cloaked in beauty, crowned by the ruin of restraint. The palace slept beneath stormlight, its marble corridors veined with shadows that whispered of forbidden things. But news travels faster than silence in Rome. Before the dawn's first horn, word of the Empress's private contest had already reached the emperor's chambers. Claudius sat alone before a brazier, the smoke twisting into fragile shapes that died as soon as they were born. A messenger, trembling, delivered the report. A night of unholy ceremony, 25 noblemen, and the Empress herself presiding like a goddess over their humiliation. At first he laughed, a sound brittle and hollow. "My wife," he murmured, "has outdone Caligula." But as the laughter faded, his face hardened into stone. Behind him, the Praetorian prefect stood still, uncertain whether to speak. "She means to test Rome itself," the emperor said finally, "to see if loyalty still lives when stripped of armor and pride." Then, after a long silence, he added, "Let us wager. Rufus, if she survives her own folly, she shall hold the keys to my treasury. If not, her name will be erased from every temple, every scroll, every stone that bears it." Rufus bowed his head, the faintest trace of pity flickering in his eyes. "And if she does survive, Caesar?" "Then," Claudius said coldly, "Rome will have a new god, and a ghost." He ordered spies dispatched at once, silent watchers stationed behind veiled curtains and carved screens that lined the Empress's chamber. Their task was not to intervene, only to witness, to record, to ensure that history would remember what the empire itself could never speak aloud. As night deepened, the watchers observed a spectacle that blurred the line between ecstasy and madness. The Empress's trials continued, no longer as mere ceremony, but as ritual. The chosen men moved as if caught in a trance, compelled by her will, their faces pale under the shifting torchlight. The air thickened with incense, sweat, and the metallic scent of fear. She stood among them like a priestess of some forgotten cult, unflinching, unreadable, her words cutting through the haze. "Rome does not conquer by sword or by faith. It conquers by surrender." In one corner, a scribe's hand trembled as he wrote those words. From his hidden gallery, the emperor watched through the lattice screen. His pulse quickened, not from jealousy, but from awe and dread. He saw in her not a wife, not even a rival, but a force. Something ungovernable. Hours passed. The contest blurred into something unnameable, a fevered dream of devotion and collapse. Men swore eternal loyalty, only to crumble moments later. Others wept openly, confessing sins long buried. The Empress neither comforted nor condemned. She merely observed, as though measuring the distance between power and ruin. By midnight, several of the watchers could no longer continue their notes. One fainted. Another turned away, whispering prayers. Claudius remained still. His wager, once made in jest, now felt like prophecy. When the final torch guttered out, the Empress's voice echoed through the dark. "This is Rome, not in marble, not in battle, but in flesh that obeys when spirit has died." The words struck the emperor like a blade. He rose, silent, and left the chamber unseen. "Let her finish it," he told Rufus, "and when she falls, let the world remember who allowed it." Outside, thunder rolled across the Palatine hill, inside. History turned, quietly, mercilessly, toward dawn. Dawn came not as light, but as judgment. The torches in the Empress's chamber had long since burned to stubs, their smoke coiling in the still air like the ghosts of prayers unanswered. The marble floor was slick with spilled wine and sweat. The scent of incense turned bitter, metallic. 25 had entered the chamber. Now as the first pale glow touched the curtains, only 7 remained breathing. The Empress lay among them, her hair undone, her jeweled diadem tilted, her pulse faint but steady. Her physician, Lucian, hovered nearby, his hands trembling as he examined her. Her skin was cold, perfumed still, her lips parted as though whispering secrets even in unconsciousness. "Too much of the draught," he muttered. "Opium and honey, to dull the body and sharpen the will. But she's taken too much." A soldier, barely conscious, tried to rise. His voice rasped, "Did we win, Majesty?" Her eyes fluttered open. For a moment, she seemed to see not the chamber but the empire itself, vast, burning, infinite. "Rome always wins," she whispered. The survivors lay broken around her, their faces pale, their breath shallow. Pride had deserted them long ago. What remained was something rawer, the quiet, stripped-down truth of what men become when stripped of title and armor. 5 had perished hours before, collapsing under exhaustion. Others succumbed to the hallucinogenic fumes that hung in the air. Some, the physician believed, had simply willed themselves to stop breathing, as though their souls had already fled. The Empress stirred, her fingers tracing the rim of a chalice that had rolled beside her throne. "Lucian," she murmured, "tell me, was it beautiful?" He hesitated, unable to answer. She smiled faintly. "Then it was. Rome understands only beauty and power. Tonight I gave it both." The chamber doors opened quietly. 2 of the Emperor's watchers entered, pale and shaken. "By order of Caesar," one stammered, "we are to see if any live." Lucian turned sharply. "They live, but barely. They need rest, not more eyes." The watcher swallowed hard. "His Majesty wishes the records complete." Behind the physician's shoulder, the Empress spoke softly. "Let them write. Let them write every word. Rome will call it madness, but centuries from now, they will call it devotion." As the scribes scratched their final notes, the survivors were carried out, their bodies draped in silk, their faces covered. Some would never wake again. Others would live, but hollowed, their gaze fixed on something no sane man could describe. Lucian remained beside his mistress. Her breathing slowed. He urged her to rest, but she shook her head faintly. "No, not yet. I must see the dawn." When light finally broke through the high lattice, it fell across her like a benediction, gold and cold at once. Her gaze softened. "It is done," she said, almost to herself. "Rome will remember." Moments later, her head tilted to the side, the faintest smile still on her lips. Lucian caught her as she fell. He called for help, his voice echoing through the silent halls, but none dared enter. For the first time in her reign, the Empress was utterly still. The watchers knelt, heads bowed. One whispered, "The gods have taken her." "No," Lucian said quietly, his hands trembling. "She took herself." Outside, the city stirred, unaware that within the Palatine walls, an empire's pulse had just changed forever. By the time the sun had reached its zenith, the palace of the Palatine had turned into a mausoleum. Curtains were drawn, courtyards emptied, and guards spoke only in whispers. Word of what had occurred during the night was forbidden to leave the marble walls. Yet rumor, as always in Rome, found its own paths through silence. Lucian, the Empress's physician, had not slept. His robes still smelled of incense and blood. He sat beside her motionless form, now resting on a couch draped in crimson. The opium had slowed her heart, but not stopped it entirely. Still, He feared that if she awoke, her enemies would make sure she didn't again. When the chamberlain entered, his face pale, Lucian rose. "Tell the emperor she lives," he said firmly, though his voice betrayed him. Barely. The chamberlain's gaze lingered on the bodies being carried out through the eastern passage. Shrouded, nameless, the 25 reduced to mere shapes beneath linen. "And the others?" he asked. "Dead," Lucian replied. "But not from her hand. From their own weakness." The words hung heavy in the air. Both men knew they were lies. Lies meant to keep the physician alive a little longer. By dusk, soldiers came for him. The Praetorians said nothing as they escorted him to the underground cells, where the walls dripped and the air reeked of iron. The emperor awaited him there, his face shadowed by lamplight. "So," Claudius said quietly, "tell me what she has done." Lucian hesitated. "She sought no treason, my lord. Only understanding. She wished to know the limits of human devotion. By destroying 25 of Rome's finest," the emperor hissed. "By turning the Palatine into a temple of degradation?" The physician bowed his head. "Majesty, you do not understand her hunger. She wished to conquer the will, not the flesh." Claudius's eyes flashed. "And did she?" Lucian's lips trembled. "Yes, even now you tremble when you speak her name." The emperor struck him across the face. "Confess the rest." So he did. He confessed to the drugs mixed with honeyed wine, to the incense that clouded the senses, to the chants whispered from forbidden scrolls. He described how the Empress had tested endurance as though it were divinity, how she had transformed submission into proof of faith. By the end, the Emperor's rage had cooled into something colder: fear. "Burn the chamber," Claudius ordered. "Seal it with new marble. Let no tongue speak of it again." "And the survivors?" asked Rufus, the prefect. Claudius turned away. "They have seen too much. End it. And their families too. Rome cannot afford memory." Lucian's chains rattled as he fell to his knees. "Majesty, spare her. She lives still, weak, yes, but alive." The emperor's voice was soft, almost kind. "Then let her sleep forever. She is to be called ill, struck by fever. The empire cannot endure such truth." That night, while the executions were carried out in silence, Lucian was taken back to the Empress's chambers. She stirred once, her eyes opening faintly. He took her hand, whispering, "They will erase you." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Then they will remember me forever." Moments later, soldiers entered. The physician was taken away, his fate sealed in the depths of the Imperial archive. The chamber was locked. Incense still lingered in the air, faint, sweet, and poisoned with memory. By morning, Rome was silent again. But beneath that silence, something eternal had begun to whisper: the legend of the woman who made gods of men and ashes of their devotion. In the days that followed, the Palatine stood as if mourning its own sins. The torches burned lower, the fountains ran slower, and no music echoed through the marble halls. The Empress Valeria remained secluded in her chamber, her pulse faint but steady, a ghost reigning from her bed. Outside, the city seethed with whispers. Merchants told tales of divine punishment. Priests muttered that Venus herself had cursed the imperial house. The Senate met in secret. Behind locked bronze doors, Rome's most powerful men argued over a single question: what to do with the woman who had humiliated them all. "Her madness has stained the empire," spat Senator Drusus. "The people think our rulers have turned their palace into a brothel of gods." Another, older voice, Senator Vibius, replied wearily, "She is the emperor's wife. To condemn her is to condemn him." The silence that followed was heavier than the marble pillars that surrounded them. Everyone knew Claudius had lost control. His authority, once absolute, now rested in the trembling shadow of a woman who had not spoken since that cursed night. At the far end of the hall, The emperor sat unmoving. His hair, once black, now showed streaks of gray. His eyes were ringed with sleeplessness. He spoke only once during the session. She must never rule again. The decision was not written nor sealed, but understood. Valeria Messiana was to be erased quietly, not executed. A death by silence. That evening, the emperor visited her chamber for the first time since the competition. She lay reclined, pale as the linen beneath her. When she saw him, she tried to rise, but the weight of her body defied her. "So," she murmured, her voice thin as dust. "The Senate has spoken?" Claudius hesitated. "They wish peace. Rome cannot bear another scandal." "Peace?" she whispered. "You mean forgetting?" He said nothing. The faint light of the oil lamps revealed the cracks in his composure. She studied him, not with love, but with a kind of sorrow reserved for the defeated. "You were always afraid of me," she said. Claudius turned toward the window. "You turned Rome against itself. You made gods of men, then left them broken." Valeria smiled faintly. "They broke themselves, my lord. I only gave them the chance." He clenched his fists, then released them. "The Senate demands a public appearance. You will dine with them once more. You will show them that you live, that you are penitent." Her eyes flickered with something unreadable, amusement perhaps. "And if I refuse?" "Then they will declare you unfit and end this quietly." For a long while neither spoke. The distant hum of the city crept through the balcony, muffled prayers, the rhythm of chariots, the ceaseless breath of Rome. Finally she whispered, "Very well. A final banquet then. For peace." When he left, the Empress turned her gaze toward the ceiling fresco, Venus descending among mortals. She remembered the night of the 25, the faces, the trembling, the fire that had burned away her fear. What the Senate saw as sin, she had seen as revelation. As servants approached to prepare her for the banquet, Valeria dismissed them all. Alone, she poured a drop of dark liquid into a crystal vial of wine. Her hand did not tremble. Outside, thunder gathered over the Palatine, rolling like distant drums of war. Within the marble heart of the empire, an empress prepared for her last performance, not of seduction, but of vengeance wrapped in serenity. The banquet began beneath a sky bruised with storm. Thunder rolled across Rome as if the gods themselves disapproved. The Senate gathered in the Hall of Concord, where golden frescoes glowed in torchlight and marble columns shimmered with rain reflected from the open atrium. There, among the empire's most powerful, Empress Valeria Messiana appeared, pale, radiant, and impossibly calm. Her entrance drew silence. The senators rose, uncertain whether to bow. Even Claudius, seated at the head of the table, looked upon her with the wary reverence one reserves for a viper that might still strike. "Rome welcomes her empress," he declared, his voice brittle. Valeria smiled faintly, her jeweled veil glinting. "Rome has no need to welcome me," she said. "I have never left her." Servants poured wine into crystal chalices. The scent of roasted pheasant and saffron drifted through the air. Yet beneath the grandeur lay unease, an invisible current of fear, like the weight before a blade descends. The senators watched her hands, her lips, her eyes, searching for the madness they had only heard of in whispers. Claudius raised his cup. "To peace in Rome," he said. Valeria lifted hers. "And to remembrance." The two drank together. For a moment, nothing happened. Conversation resumed, soft and hesitant. A musician plucked a lyre. Rain began to fall against the marble roof. The sound was almost soothing. Then Valeria's hand trembled. The chalice slipped from her grasp and clattered against the floor. She gasped, her eyes widening. Claudius half rose, uncertain whether to reach for her or recoil. "Valeria," he called. Her lips moved soundlessly before foam touched their corners. She swayed once, twice, then fell against the table. Dishes shattered, goblets spilled crimson across the marble like fresh blood. Panic erupted. Senators scrambled from their seats. Guards rushed forward, unsure whether to aid or restrain. Claudius knelt beside her, shaking her shoulders. "Who did this?" he roared. But her gaze was already fading, fixed upon him with something between pity and triumph. A whisper escaped her throat, faint, almost lost beneath the storm. "Rome will remember." Then she was still. The physician, the same who had once served her, was gone, executed weeks before. No antidote existed, and none could say what poison she had chosen. Some claimed Claudius had slipped it into her cup first. Others swore she had done so herself, ensuring the last word would belong to her. The emperor stood motionless as the hall descended into chaos. Lightning flashed through the atrium, illuminating his face, not of grief, but disbelief. He ordered the doors barred, the witnesses detained. "No one speaks of this," he commanded. "Not to the people, not to the gods." By dawn, her body had been taken to a private cremation ground on the outskirts of the city. There was no procession, no inscription, no mourning rites. The pyre burned swiftly, its smoke swallowed by the storm. Within a week, every record bearing her name was struck out. Statues were melted for coin, frescoes whitewashed. To the empire, she became damnata memoria, condemned to forgetting. And yet, forgetting proved impossible. In the taverns and temples, whispers persisted. They spoke of an empress who had conquered every man she met, and in death had conquered even the emperor himself. Rome, restless and immortal, had birthed many legends, but none so haunting as the woman who dared to make memory itself her throne. Centuries dulled Rome's empire, but not her secrets. The marble halls that once echoed with senators' voices crumbled into dust. Yet beneath the Palatine hill, something slept, waiting. It was the year 347 AD when a team of renovators, commissioned by Emperor Constans, began restoring the ancient foundations of what had once been Claudius's palace. The workers complained of hollow echoes, of air too cold and heavy to breathe. Beneath one sealed corridor, a mason's hammer struck stone and rang differently. Curiosity replaced caution. They chiseled through marble that bore no seams, uncovering a narrow stair spiraling into darkness. The foreman ordered torches brought. As they descended, the air thickened with the scent of iron and decay, the breath of centuries forgotten. At the base they found it, a chamber perfectly preserved. The walls were frescoed in gold and crimson, their paint faded but intact. In the center lay a vast circular platform of polished marble, its surface cracked yet gleaming. Scattered around it were skeletal remains, 25 men by count, their bones tangled as if frozen mid-struggle. Each wore remnants of ornate armlets and rings, the insignia of noble birth. But it was the figure at the center that silenced them. A woman's bones, still crowned by a jeweled diadem, reclined upon a broken couch of ivory. Around her neck glimmered a faint trace of gold thread, once belonging to an imperial robe. On the floor before her, carved into the marble itself, were words that chilled every soul present. Valeria, who conquered in one night. The chamber was sealed again, guards posted at every entrance. By dusk, imperial scholars arrived. What they documented shook the court. Artifacts were catalogued, fragments of glass vessels containing residue of an unknown compound, likely the opium-laced wine from the fateful night, and a scroll half-preserved, listing 25 names written in a physician's hand. The church demanded silence. The priests called it blasphemy, a pagan relic of depravity. They urged the emperor to destroy it all, to erase the shame of Rome's ancient sin. But the historians hesitated. "This is not sin," one murmured, "it is history." Still, the chamber was sealed once more. Years passed, empires fell, knowledge faded into rumor. But the story survived, whispered among archivists, hinted at in forbidden texts. Some said the bones were burned by order of a later pope. Others claimed the chamber still exists, hidden beneath layers of the Palatine, untouched since that day. Modern excavations have found no trace, at least none admitted. Yet certain reports, buried deep in Vatican archives, speak of a marble vault of the Empress, unearthed briefly during the Renaissance before being sealed again. And so Valeria's story became something more than a scandal. It became a mirror. Her competition was not lust, but rebellion, a defiance of men who sought to claim her body and power alike. Her death was not shame, but triumph. For even in ruin, she forced Rome to remember what it wished to forget, that its empire, its gods, its order, all were built upon the flesh of those it tried to silence. The narrator's voice fades over the flicker of torchlight upon stone. History, it says softly, is not written by the victors. It is written by those who refuse to disappear. And somewhere beneath the marble of modern Rome, the Empress still waits, her legend unburied, her conquest eternal.